Hello and welcome to the AIDS 2014 Global Village Connect webinar series. My name is Dean Beck, and today exploring the intersection between human rights and HIV and tuberculosis co-infection. In fact, we're looking at making human rights the core of the HIV and TB response. I'm joined by LYNETTE MABOTE as a Human Rights Advocacy Team Leader at and Rights Alliance for South Africa. LYNETTE, thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
Also today is IAKOBISHVILI. I'll do it from now on. She is with the Eurasian Harm Reduction Network, and in 2013 she the Human Rights Program Manager to make full use of her experience in the field of human rights advocacy and changing space in and Central Asia with regards to injecting drug use. Thank you very much for joining us today.
Thank you for being here.
Let's start with you. Why is this issue of tuberculosis and HIV a challenging one for many?
TB health. TB killed the mummy, and TB does today. In the region, which is Southern Africa as well as East Africa and the African region, we've got a lot more people dying because of TB than we've always had it. It's remained status quo to expect people to die of TB. HIV came into place 30 years ago. People died much faster. Presented with the disease. So we basically saw people dying every second day. We lost a lot of family members.
The two diseases work beautifully together at killing people, don't they? And when together, they present all sorts of challenges in regards to medication and response.
Yeah, catastrophic. Actually, this is why we need to have TB and HIV basically collaborative, more integrated responses to those diseases.
Actually, and I guess of injecting drug use in Eastern Europe and has had problems for quite some time. The environment makes it very difficult if you have injecting drug users. How do you access injecting drug users?
Just to give overall background of the situation, 0.5 million people who inject drugs in the region, that's Europe and Central Asia, and leading a lot of people who inject drugs and live with HIV, so that tells it. And because in many countries, harm reduction interventions are actually banned, legally banned, such as Uzbekistan, for example, a situation when with tuberculosis just do not come forward, meaning that tuberculosis is a disease that needs a closed setting, and the treatment takes place in closed settings, whereas HIV is not as a similar disease as tuberculosis, so it can be treated even while in society. And tuberculosis hospitals often will have available treatment for people who inject drugs, meaning that's or that would be, for drug dependency, such as harm reduction services. So we have a whole spectrum of legal, political, social problems, and that's, of course, social comes to stigma, discrimination, violence, because people have been alienated from themselves. So psychologically, there's a lot of problems with these groups. So, and multi-resistance tuberculosis, multi-drug as well, because it's not detected at an early stage, and lots of countries in this region are from, the remnants of Soviet Union. So that means that a lot of health systems are still operating in the way they did beforehand. So that means community health is more important than individual health, and that somewhat may be similar to what you have been describing yesterday, Lynette. So you have lots of layers and layers, and it becomes very difficult for organizations such as us to evaluate to the
Understanding of this associated with tuberculosis, when something around HIV, but tuberculosis has its own stigma associated with it. Tell us about that.
That's been done, especially from my region. We see that realization of tuberculosis. This basically manifests in people who aren't adhering to treatment. So what happens is you present, you're given the treatment. At oral, there is some sort of resistance, and you're put on drug-resistant tuberculosis treatment. You are put in a hospital for 18 months. Okay, so 18 months. Well, they call it isolation, but the way it's done, it's not really isolation. So when a single mother, that is going to basically put you in a very precarious situation. So to escape, go back home, they miss their families. They don't understand why they're being treated this way. Countries such as Swaziland and Botswana now is that the officials report people to the police and now they are incarcerated and not isolated according to the Sarakosa principles, global principles, a lot of things which give us how to isolate people. And followed in a country like Kenya, a lot of our partners who are doing a lot of legal assistance work have taken the government to court because as well people are being arrested when they adhere to the drugs. Why? Because they're hungry. You can't take TB drugs on an empty stomach. They are gruesome to the body. So people are criminalized because of HIV. So that's where the stigma comes from. A lot of communities as well, people with TB are seen to be bewitched. The community understand TB that well. So now there is social acceptance of HIV. TB, people are just saying it's too much and they don't understand it. So of course that increases societal stigma. Who get married culturally are disinherited. A lot of them get divorced because the husbands do not want to be with the person who's bewitched, as it were.
People for drugs, that framework of what we know in perhaps Western society as the war on drugs, that play out in Europe and this infection.
Eastern Europe as well. In fact, my country, which is Georgia in Eastern Europe, a small country in Caucasus, most repressive drug policies in the entire region, meaning that for a simple smoke of marijuana, you can go to prison up to 3 to 4 years. Essentially, you had in 2012, you had every one adult person having a criminalization record, conviction record. Basically, 1/3 of that was for drug. Spectrum of activities within the drug offences, as it is defined by the EMCDD. But other countries, even where drug use is not criminalized, as such, you have got situations where police uses all sorts of legal activities such as blackmailing, extorting money, just picking people up in streets, and bribery as well. Huge corruption. Pakistan, Tajikistan, Ukraine, into how these situations are dealt with. Incarceration and prisons in particular is quite problematic in that sense. So is Russia and Ukraine. And in countries, I might be wrong actually on that. I don't want to very strongly, but certainly in Russia and certainly Ukraine, full package of harm reduction services, none in Russia, in fact, because Russian drug policies for 2010 to 2020 explicitly bans even the use of a term harm reduction, and you can go to prison for under the article of glorification of drugs, if you mention harm reduction. And none of the treatment services available, and you have a situation in these two countries when you have such high rates of HIV among society, and that is doubled or even tripled in some cases in prisons, and you have got co-infections in there, and come and go within the prison system. And the situation is that for drug use, you don't go to prison for 10 years, right? You go to prison for 3 to 4 years. It is a time which is rather easy because of malnutrition. There is all sorts of overcrowding issues and so on. And then that's a very short period of time when you go to prison, then go again and come out. Certain hazard, which is the risk, which is that you carry diseases with you. Therefore, you go to public, you take with you, then you go to prison, and you come out and you carry it over and over. And until now, the comprehensive analysis of this situation. I mean, I know Ukraine did some analysis of HIV in prisons and of course preventions. The professors from Germany worked on it, but the government has not taken it on board. There's a lot of problem. Very often things are blamed on the resources, mostly financial resources, but it's not just financial resources, it's mostly the political will. So,
issue with drugs in the prison system itself?
Surely, no country can say that there is no drug in the prison.
Nobody admits to it.
But the thing is, again, just go back to my country, right? The president of the country in 2006 announced zero tolerance policy. That was 2006. In a week's time, the respective laws were passed, and from 1,000 prison population, we jumped up to 20,000 prison population. I have worked in prison. I have gone to prisons as an independent human rights monitor, and I have seen tremendous stuff that I don't want to see that in my life. So the situation is that, they said, well, there is the drugs in prisons, and when we spoke to people who use drugs and they had been to prisons, right? Say, yeah, that's right, because we felt like we have been in a concentration camp. We have been beaten up every single day in the morning and the evening, and the situation they described was amount to torture, and there has been lots of international recommendations on that. Just last word that in 2012, the videos came out, the footage came out from Georgian prisons, which was the prison administration rating the front of everybody, meaning quite a large group of prisoners. So to give an example how they should have behaved. Yes. So, and that very much prompted the governmental change. We had a change of the political part of the government in the power. So that's how big it can get. So,
but no votes in prisons, and seem to get that national engagement from an incident so vile as that. You have access to. What is the thing getting in the way of getting on this problem? Is it full engagement? Why that we are not interested in this thing?
I think for SADC in general, South Africa has done a lot of work, and they seem to be access to treatment. The only problem that South Africa now faces is the fact that we're dealing with patent barriers, sexual property barriers. So we are finding it more and more difficult to access affordable, safe, generic medication. Because we've got a weak patent system, and so activists such as the Treatment Action Campaign and Section 27 are working on that. That is another story altogether. Context to context within SADC in East Africa, but mostly it's the political will. The very same issues that I think it is expressing, we deal with the very same issues. well, or classified under middle income countries, where the World Bank is not really helping us as well, because a lot of social determinants are impeding progress. Not only is it stigma and discrimination, but it's also actual access to healthcare for key populations, let's say. Vulnerabilities brought around by issues such as patriarchy that are very heavily entrenched in the system. So we still have a long way to go, I'd say. And we're not really seeing the reductions that we're expecting to be seen because of the aspect of human rights and understanding of human rights principles that can actually assist us in progressing and on both epidemics.
ECHO was well for its response with the harm reduction process in injecting drug for programs. With your visit here to AIDS 2014, but it would be a shift in political willpower for something like this to be introduced throughout Eastern Europe.
Level of answer here. There are less than 40 countries that have Midland exchange programs. Majority of them are in Western Europe. We also know that, 40 that's the opioid substitution therapy. Less than 10 is the Middle Eastern exchange programs.
Extraordinary.
Yeah.
That alone is extraordinary.
Yeah, exactly. And we also know that even though the UN Office on Drugs and Crime has been very vocal, in fact, in promoting harm reduction services, maybe not naming them as harm reduction, but certainly promoting the 15 intervention services now that were designed for jointly by UNHCR, WHO, UNDP, and the UNODC. Obviously, countries do not have a political will. That basically comes with the security aspect, because when you talk about prisons, especially, you have a competing interest of health and the security, and very often security prevails, as we have observed. And so, to deal with it.
Sorry, why is health and security competing interests?
Because when you talk about injecting drug use within prison environment, the drug should not be reaching inside the prison. It's reaching, therefore something is going wrong with the security.
No,
Number two, you need a health response to the drug use, which means that when it fails now, health should go forward. So what's going on? So that even if you meet with the prison administrations, you will see that that kind of competition is always there. Very often, the Ministry of Health is less vocal than Ministry of Interior, the Prosecutor's Office, the Ministry of Justice, and so on, the main ones that design the criminal justice policy. So that's kind of how the whole kind of the policies are designed within country context. And the societies, I mean, an example, Pakistan, for example, it's a central country and very much kind of sport, and there's a wide spread of drug use in this country, and very resistant to introduce the harm reduction services, after realizing that actually this may be a good idea with the fund of Global Fund, which I often kind of criticize, because what's going to happen when the Global Fund leaves? Because they are a rich country, and yes, today they are very inclined to do that, but what's going to happen tomorrow? So we don't know what will happen. That's one, and therefore, because Pakistan has a very good scheme of available OSTs and NSPs in society and in prison. The so-called Anger 2016 that's coming up, and that the UN General Assembly high-level talk on drug policies. It's got 2016. In fact, it's going to be in May. And there's a lot of preparation by non-governmental organizations, either regional or international. There's a lot of mobilization, lots of hopes. In fact, I just left a meeting, strategic planning meeting, that lots of drug user groups are involved from all over the world, and so on and so forth. You see, though, when you talk about drug policies, these drugs such as harm reduction and access to treatment, HIV, and so on. The reason for that is that drug policies itself, it's a large policy. It comprises many different aspects, including
most of it's legal and not enough of it health.
Yeah, exactly.
Yes.
Although we know that drug policy is nothing but the composure of health and criminal justice policy. It's a version of it, right? Both of these policies. So, and then there have a lot of even then you have got development NGOs really worried about, for example, coca bushes in Southern America and so on and so forth, right? It's all these competing interests. So how do you make sure that harm reduction stays on the agenda and actually it's an instrumental point in reforming the drug policies in countries? And go back to it because it's an interesting country. It's a country that works very lot. And the hepatitis C problem, 20% prevalence among society and 60% prevalence in prisons.
2% in general population?
So, yes.
Wow.
60% in prison. Imagine you have to also imagine that I mentioned the prompt of prison population from 7 to 9,000 4,000. And with legal cases being taken to the European Court on Human Rights, on HC, there was hundreds and hundreds of cases being sent to the court, the European Court on Human Rights, and they made they issued just a blanket statement, or the saying, look, we deal with this, do something with this system, because it's a systematic problem. It's not just one case of denying an access to treatment. It's got a systematic problem. When they come to your prison, I mean, what you do, you put them,
you lock away and they come out.
And then therefore they spread their thing in society. Now I have to mention,
yes.
With the help of drug policy groups, with the help of health groups, tremendous support from Open Society Foundation as well, and the Global Commission on Drug Policy, which Tajkin sits on. He is the former director for the Global Fund. It's helpful for the government to introduce hepatitis C treatment in prisons and discounts in society, because it cost about, like, to HCV, it was about $30,000, and normal people can't really afford it. I mean, honestly, it's quite a lot of money for people of Georgia, because it's a very, very poor country. And there's a lot of discussions now. We expect that it's going to go down, like, really, like, up to $2 to $5, which is going to be an achievement.
So, yeah, but you need...
We have a political will. We have Minister of Justice, like 2 weeks ago again, we had a meeting in Geneva, and they're open. They say we are doing anything. It's a process in planning. The NGOs are involved. We have national experts providing expertise. We have pharma companies being part of the whole discussion, and giving a generous contribution to what is a political, move. Just hepatitis, it's not just drugs. It's a combination of things.
Shift in political will is clearly at the core of getting on top of these. Civil society play in that from a local perspective and a global perspective.
Very interesting question, because I think, friends, I've heard a lot about how IT needs more funding in order for society to be better service delivery implementers or custodians, and that's civil society. I always fight with UNAIDS around this. Language is very critical because in our countries we have become the service providers. So what's the role of government? Because you're a provider as well as a monitor at the same time. A lot of our countries, what we started doing is doing a lot of accountability work with our governments. We're very, I think, grateful, especially as Africans, that the Global Fund came through when it did, and programs such as the PIPFA and all of those. What those programs have essentially done now is, I think, the same thing that ICA's worried about their region, is that they have spoiled our governments to such an extent that majority of our health programs are funded through the Global Fund or through some sort of donor, while are buying jets, going on holiday, chilling, like there's no problem on earth. We currently are holding those governments accountable because Africa needs to really be at the center of its own response, pulling back. We're working with the African Union. It's a lot of help in coming up with an African roadmap. The roadmap has basically got a strategy where African countries need to start funding the response. That is basically, I think, of the accountability. That is the crux of the leadership that is required for us to see Africa taking care of its own problems. Because at current point, we really are seeing, such as the Global Fund, actually being curious because of various reasons, including the fact that not these are going to be funded with this new funding model. We are in trouble, and somehow, like, we're waiting for them to see you did not funding, we react, and we're very worried about that. So we're doing a lot of advocacy with national government.
The global many times in the African region, though, and see a level of ownership in China and them the issue and the Global Fund being able to happily let go and resources elsewhere. Share your frustration. All of accountability can ensure that this doesn't continue to occur, or that the money is channeled to where they're needed.
Unfortunately,
who's policing this?
Yeah, that's a catch-22, because at current point we're like, we addicts or addicts to the Global Fund, our health systems, right? Because the people that suffer in the end are the people on the ground. Me, African regional, can ask any common man in the street, would you take the drugs? Then they say the Global Fund, they'll say my government. Okay. So already,
good.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So there's no connect that actually these funds are coming from an external source. They're not coming from my hard-earned money, because I pay taxes as a citizen. So of course the government should give me health care, but that's not the reality or the truth at all. So at a static level, what we're seeing is government saying to us, okay, to come up with better financial accountability mechanisms. So how do we do that? And they're starting to ask us as civil society. So we are also considering things like, transaction taxes, national funds, and all these other really innovative financing mechanisms that other civil society, even within a European space, a lot of our colleagues are doing globally, and basically that at a local level. So with that, is the fact there's not the interim, right? We have been currently in the interim. It's so much corruption. Like globally, there's corruption, but ours is so glaring. It's actually quite disgusting. People at times,
and we look at that from afar and go, how does people of this nation allow this to occur? So obscene.
We're cultural people, so the president is king. So what you don't hold your president accountable. It's not allowed. Otherwise, it's un-African to hold your leaders accountable. What you're supposed to do is swallow and say, yes, master, it's okay. Yes, it's civil society trying to reinforce these messaging to communities in the most respectful way as possible, using the right-based response to say, well, really, at the end of the day, they're going to be taking their facilities. I think is slow in reaching them, but with the likes of TAC and what's happened with HIV, this movement has shift in communities to say, actually, you can fight for your rights. We've shown you that it can be done. I think there will be too many casualties in the next round for us to even try to. We need to be proactive. So I think that with these mechanisms that we're seeing at a local level, we will be able to start taking responsibility and national ownership for our response, increasing funding for health, so we can start at our own health response, ensuring that Africa itself actually starts increasing manufacturing capacity. I think India is tired of it.
Yeah, speaking with LYNETTE MABOTE from South Africa. She is the rights advocacy team leader and Alliance for South Africa. And also with us is I apologise, Eka. Eka, your work throughout Central Europe, Central Asia and Eastern Europe, from the discovery of HIV, and this that is seeing and continuing to grow within Eastern Europe, must be a frustrating thing for you, a human rights advocate, to be around these things that care of, or should have been taken care of, or are taken care of globally in some front, but just not implemented.
Correct. Everywhere in the world, the HIV rates are decreasing, whereas in Eastern Europe and Central Asia, it's actually quite opposite. And that increase is mainly driven by injecting confuse again. Is that I think LYNETTE actually mentioning in terms of people not knowing how to hold the governments accountable for many issues, and this is one of them in terms of having been access to treatment, online training for people who use drugs or live with HIV or are sex workers, different communities and different countries in the region. And it was probably quite funny for people outside that region to see kinds of discussions I held with these groups. For example, right. So if qualified, I decide I have. I mean, I am a certificate. I have. And it's to explain them what human rights actually means, that you are not deprived of human rights because of your social status or because of your HIV status or whatever. To explain them that, well, those human rights are given to you by nature. You have them because you are a human being. And I have those discussions. And sometimes we even go to the philosophy, and it's quite amusing in times, honestly, to see where these discussions lead us. And about the Constitution, why they need human rights, and people tell me, well, I'm bored with you telling me how many rights I have and police stops, because I always give you have got 3 basic rights. And they said, well, yeah, but just why do I need them? I tell that to police. Give me up more. And you need them because one, it's a general knowledge, and knowledge is good. Does no matter whether you use them or not. Knowledge is good. That's a basic thing, believe me. Okay, well, you don't need to tell the police straight away that you know your rights. What you need to do is very slowly and clearly observe how police behaves, and just very slowly, follow procedures, and then try to make it as right as possible conditions, depending on your circumstances at the time. And then they say, yeah, but it doesn't really matter still. But it helps to mobilize them. It helps to increase the knowledge about, for example, why hospital members need to accept them in hospital when they have HIV. Because in most countries, in Eastern Europe, Central Asian region, you have got laws which says that if you are a drug user, you can't access to HIV services, so you have to either apply, you still get the HIV services, and they discover you actually inject drugs, they will kick you out. So, in a way, yeah.
But that only, I mean, this is my privilege, but we all will perpetuate the transference of the disease.
That we know, but tell that to a hospital manager or a nurse.
But a hospital manager should know that better than you and I.
Well, that's what you imagine. That's why we say that. That's what, like, that is so needed at the curriculums at national level. Like, not just the police training curriculums, these are, with so that.
And this is more than just basic sex education.
Yeah. It's not even a sex education. It's just common sense we would understand. But the thing is, again, going back to the Soviet kind of the generation thing, is that in lots of these hospitals, people who their education comes from Soviet times. We like it or not, that's how it is. And Soviet education was very regimented. It was, they still use the word narcology, which is kind of a combination of addictology and social. It's the medicalization of drug dependency, the medicalization of the severe medicalization that includes psychiatric and a physical kind of dependence. They look at it from narcological point of view, and they we don't accept these new research. Like Rush, for example, they don't want that.
From the so this space for those Eastern countries.
Some countries, certainly. Some more than others, of course. And again, to go back to my country, it's a very small country, so it's easily manageable. So it's for 1 million people. So
it could become the world's best practice case study.
Yeah, they love experimenting, and they like to compare those to other successful. Because it's going wrong there. So. But if you take Ukraine or Russia, they're not a country. Geographically, honestly, to go to the nearest, from one prison to another. Just taking a prison example in Ukraine, you might want to stay for 4 days on a train. And can you imagine who is going to go there? People. Administration would own the world there. They would own everything.
In fact, it is the world as they know it.
Yeah. Exactly. So, and that Soviet education is education, and there's not anything being done to enlighten them on more progressive kind of thinking that has moved to the 21st century. There's new discoveries in terms of treatment of TB, HIV. In fact, they may think that TB is not curable still. So, just a joke. But still, and then most of my cases that are violations, they are related to hospital people who use drugs. That stigma, that's the structural violence and structural discrimination that needs to be looked at as structural, meaning that the government has to do something. It's not changing societal attitudes and the awareness amongst people. It's a structural change that has to be
cultural, it's structural.
Yeah. Sometimes structural becomes cultural. But unless you do things from both sides, the change is not going to happen. So,
let's actually need for education around some what consider some base level understandings of what we're entitled to your argument for mainstreaming human rights. And what do you mean?
According to the way that it was introduced to us, it was very Western in its conception. So, as I was saying in my presentation yesterday, we come from community-oriented, right? There's no authority cards. I think therefore I am doesn't exist.
But there is a hierarchical structure.
Yes, of course. But as much as it's hierarchical, it's basically very much community changed, right? So we'll do. I don't know if Ubuntu is often am because of you, because of us. So it's umuntu ngabantu. So because individual, it's very difficult for you to claim your rights as an individual. You have no autonomy in that sense. If you were to then express the fact that you had autonomy, then you'd have to go hierarchy to report.
Get it all right, yeah. Okay.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Then only the hierarchy would say, yes, you do have. Yes. This is happening currently with a lot of women.
But that could be worked to the advantage, surely.
Trying, right? But I think that's why we say using human rights as a culture, so that it makes sense to our leaders. I mean our leaders, at a community level, so that they understand how important it is to treat women with respect, to stop the genital mutilation, to respect care people and sex workers. Because of this concept, that's how we hold them accountable. It is very sad because we've just gotten, there's a case that's ongoing in Lesotho, which deals with female primogeniture, women able to inherit chieftaincy because of virtue of being women, right? So it's in the face of it is, but a colleague of mine who works, who's one of the lawyers, was saying to us, well, it's funny to the claimants and how they've 5 rounds of lawyers. The first it was like, no, you've got no case, you're a woman. That's of course you're like, what is this? You've got no laws there, right? Like,
yeah.
So even at level, the rights is not there. This is why we need education to start mainstreaming human rights, because if there's appreciation for it, no understanding for it, therefore there will be no implementation of programming in our country.
And they can only be universal if they're accepted on the same level.
Exactly, and I think that's where the disjuncture is. It's like, what universal declaration? What, I don't know what you're talking about. No,
and then there are countries that just ignore it.
Well, completely, yes. I mean, a country where, it's very funny. I represent my organization at the African Commission for Human and People's Rights.
I wanted to ask you what the difference is between human and people's rights.
I'm not actually sure. That's quite an interesting question, and I think it's also entrenched in Ubuntu, right? The human and the people. We need to understand that there are 2 different things, and I think that's why, naively, I think, just like from my own personal opinion, I think that's why they separated them. But the organ of the African Union, ARASA, is supposed to report and basically take care of human rights issues. Funny enough, the offices of the African Commission for Human and People's Rights are in Banjul, West Africa, in Banjul, in the Gambia. The Gambia is the worst human rights record ever in the entire region. And I find it very difficult that we would take people to a country where, when people are sick, the president, basically the country's traditional healer. So you give in herbs for your HIV status, and it's been happening for a very long time. And if it's healed, you get basically isolated to an island, and this is like common practice. People are just like, oh yeah, it happens. So it's a civilization that's not necessarily documented in statute. And that's where we have the African Commission for Human Rights. So, rights, I think, to countries in Africa, I think I would agree, they're very abstract things. We've now started appreciating the fact that because the reality at current point where we're sitting, it is critical for us to appreciate the fact that I can't go into a country where there's female genital mutilation and say to people, fight for visit a documented period of time and expect to get impact, because it takes a very long time to educate people. Like a whole mind
that becomes the cultural change.
Yeah, exactly. The mind shift is required. That's where you actually see real change, right? And real change takes time for donors to have the impact tomorrow. So you always struggle quite a lot to see that change in the period of time that is required.
Before that, there will be a UN Congress around drugs in 2016. We've known how these diseases get transferred amongst populations, including injected drug use, for so long now. We knew from almost what is it that we don't already know, and how Congress see that in your region that is desperately needed?
Mainly, I think the need for the call for the Angus 2016, a very South American kind of development. As we know, Uruguay kind of cannabis, and that has spurred quite a lot of states at the CND, the states that sit at the CND. Just to explain, CND is the Commission on Narcotics Drugs, the National Commission under ECOSOC, which is itself the General Assembly. So the CND sits in Vienna, and then it convenes once a year in March. Countries gather once a year, basically to talk about drug problems and adopt resolutions. They are really adopted, they're agreed. Sometimes it takes nights and nights for countries to come to a consensus, and have countries like China and Russia on the Commission. It may even multiple things. The country saw that the change was coming. There's quite a lot of growing movement, in fact, for regulation rather than the legalization of drugs, rather than prohibition. So there's a whole dichotomy of prohibitionists versus legalizers. Or
the US, we have no more room to put prisoners, and we see them capitalizing on the sale of drugs, taxing them at a time when governments desperately need money actually challenged. Is going to be that are rolled out throughout the world because they see the financial benefits of it. In your region?
So basically that's very much kind of driven by all these responses, plus USA, which is itself an example in terms of imprisonment of people for drug-related offences and stuff. Imagine that's going to be, again, just go back to my previous point on harm reduction. What we are trying is that we have been fortunate enough to be chosen by the Global Fund to be given over $6 to execute a program, which is an advocacy program region to basically advocate for the transfer of the harm reduction funding from donors to the state. So there's a lot of email to be done to basically persuade the government to pick up things. $6 million very big on the paper, but region, and it's quite big for us as an organization because we are a really small organization. Yes. But it is not that much for the region and for the trade.
How are we actually talking about that you'll be focusing on directly?
Under this particular global fund program, we have 5 countries, which is Kazakhstan, Tajikistan, Moldova, and Belarus, and they are very
different targeted campaigns are needed.
Yeah, absolutely, and chosen by transparent competition. So we did not pick them up. So the process started from the grassroots. Actually, the whole project proposal was designed from the learning what was needed and so on and so forth. It's quite a tedious process that I won't bore with, but these are very different countries from one to another. But so just to know that it is a 3-year project, and trying to how we're trying to link that to Angus 2016, push for the cause. There are different asks that they also have put forward for the Angus, and we are actually joining the Harm Reduction International ask, which is basically formulated in 2. Which one is the funding for harm reduction services, and the other is to make harm reduction key for drug policy reform. So it's mostly needed, and the rest of the framework of human rights and documenting violations, that is something that needs to be embodied within that harm reduction drug policy. So because it's an aspect, as we see, that policies just transfer better. I think it's actually mainstream, incorporate the principles of human rights within these goals.
Question for you as we wrap up: can the global population do, I guess, your cause? And you've got a very big challenge ahead of you to get even this competition on the table. But what, as a global society?
Well, people mobilize around these issues, the better. And I believe in transparency, cooperation, and teamwork. And reduction network is. I don't want to promote my organization.
Please
but
do. No, I'm happy for you to do that.
It's an organization that incorporates people who use drugs. We have staff themselves, either former or current abusers. We act as a secretariat for Eurasian network of people who use drugs, and we believe that the more we become participatory, so the more we hear the voices of people who are vulnerable and affected, the better we can design our responses to the policies, the bad policies, as and in terms of the global community, I don't think that the global community is something separate from the local community. So if you do something in your own country or in your own respective constituency, that's good for me, because it's learning and experiencing to I can become a partner, and we can do things, and therefore we can join the actions and so on. I'm very optimistic today.
The same question to you. What is it that we can do to further understanding and help push this forward?
100%. We were actually talking because in East Africa in general is actually dealing with the situation of use drugs. It's only the coastal areas that we've got infecting drug users, but like within the populations, it's quite a growing problem. So also going into the problem, we can learn from them how to start doing the advocacy. And I think global solidarity on these issues. It's not only an African issue, and we can't keep ourselves or separating ourselves or isolating ourselves. We're a global nation, and we all suffer. When one suffers, everybody suffers. The thing happened with TB, right? It was very much okay. No, you only get in Africa, and then people came to work in Africa and they're on MDR TB and where it came from, and it just shows that because of the population, we're migrants as well, right? The world is so small that we can't really sit in our corners and hide anymore. So the best way is actually to hold hands, work together, and civil society has done tremendous, amazing work. First of all, in calling for organizations such as the Global Fund and hold our own governments accountable. I think it is key that we hold together and support each other's agendas.
Thank you very much to LYNETTE and to Eka. Your rights have been challenge inspiring. Keep up the great work, and thanks for joining us today.
Thank you.
This has been the Global Village Connect AIDS 2014 webinar series on the